So let's start with our webinar now.
Yeah.
So
Just
we
briefly about the digital solutions in medical communications. So before we actually start in detail talking about podcast, we just wanted to, give you a very brief background of why are we talking of a solution which is a audio file. uh, Majority of the medical communication, especially after COVID, even before COVID, the physical presence of somebody, always in a clinic or always in front of a doctor may not be possible. So there are so many ways in which you can communicate to various audiences, and you can do webinars, you can do podcasts, and there are digitalized slides, there are e-learning modules, there are, virtual congresses which are happening. A lot of activities around us are happening. So we are having this webinar today where everybody has joined, from their comfort of their offices or homes, and we are able to communicate with each other. This itself is a digital, revolution which has taken over a lot of, communication, and a lot of how we are networking with each other, how we are communicating and coordinating with each other. Some very interesting stats. So if you see the stat, the podcast listeners in US, they have increased from 9% to 21% in 2016, which is pretty significant. And the number, the only data what we could get, the number by 2013, approximately 250,000 podcasts in over 100 languages, over 8 million published episodes, and more than a billion subscribers. So you can see that, it's pretty vast, and people out there are actually listening to them, following them, learning from them. Now,
and
coming
in a
to some basic questions about podcast: who, what, when, and where. So, like, who are the ones who give these podcasts? What are they? When do they normally give it? And where are these podcasts available?
so till now we have learned a lot about what actually are podcasts, where are they posted, why is the need for the podcast. So all these are important, but the most important is how actually the podcasts are created. What kind of team is required to create a podcast? Let's move to this part now. So, as for any other kind of digital communication, a podcast team is required, and it involves persons starting from producers to an expert who will market the podcast. So, some more, especially related to content, when we talk, I've already said many times it should be engaging, it should definitely be informative, because we are talking about medical professionals. We are talking about, even if we are talking to layman also, then also they will listen to a podcast, a medical podcast, only if they have information which is new to them. So most of the persons would know how what is headache, but what now the people would want to know is what is the scene of COVID nowadays. So the information should go in a way that it is very easily taken up by the audience, and it is of their interest also. Information should be short, precise, bite sized. It should not be like you're speaking and going on. So it should be fair and balanced. The content should be very much with respect to the audience. If it is so now it's all that we have described a lot about how the podcast is created, what kind of team is involved in creation of a podcast, the role of a medical writer, or what should you should consider while writing a script for a medical podcast. So, what outcomes can we imagine out of a podcast? We have developed a podcast. So, what actually would it deliver? There are some do's and don'ts of podcasting. So, looks quite easy, but it is not, and it should definitely be taken care of as a very important factor, especially when we talk about medical podcast. It definitely will play a major role in shaping up the clinical practice and making patient education very easy, less time consuming, on their go. So a patient can hear, like, it is not necessary that a doctor will tell all the things to the patient while describing medicine, while treating the patient. So once that part is done, the clinical practice part is done, a link to the podcast can be shared. Please go and listen to this. These are the instructions you need to follow. How easy? So this is going to definitely make a very big change in shaping up the clinical practice, especially for our doctors who are more inclined towards treating the patients and giving them awareness. How much time does the whole process take from secondary research to sharing script with the client? So it's a very exhaustive process. It is not an overnight process, neither it is like 2 or 3 days process. It definitely take time, but if the first thing is clear that you need to make a podcast on a specific topic and the subsections are decided, then it becomes easy to jot down the points and come up with a script. But if you are having no idea about the topic and there is no subsection described, then it requires a lot of time to do the basic secondary research. So time here we can't put into hours, we can't put into days.